The sun had set over the city, casting a warm orange glow over the bustling streets of London. I, Dr. John Watson, was sitting in my favorite armchair, enjoying a quiet evening with a good book. But my peaceful evening was interrupted by the sound of the doorbell ringing. It was my dear friend and fellow detective, Sherlock Holmes. "Ah, Watson, I'm so glad I caught you at home," Holmes said, his eyes shining with excitement. "I have a case that requires your expertise. A man has been murdered in the countryside, and the local police are stumped. I think it's time we paid a visit to the scene of the crime." I put down my book and followed Holmes out of the flat, into the night air. We hailed a hansom cab and set off towards the country. The ride was long and quiet, but I could feel the tension building inside me. I had worked with Holmes on many cases before, but I had never seen him so excited. When we arrived at the scene, I was struck by the beauty of the countryside. The sun was rising over the rolling hills, casting a golden glow over the landscape. But my peace was short-lived. Holmes led me to the spot where the body lay, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The victim was a young man, with a look of shock frozen on his face. Holmes examined the body carefully, taking notes and muttering to himself. I watched in silence, feeling a sense of unease grow inside me. After a few minutes, Holmes stood up and turned to me. "Well, Watson, it seems we have a murder on our hands. But don't worry, I'm on the case. They'll get to the bottom of this, if it's the last thing I do." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. I knew that with Holmes on the case, we would get to the truth, no matter what it took. As we began our investigation, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the complexity of the case. There were so many suspects, so many motives, and so many clues. But I knew that with Holmes' brilliant mind and my own skills, we would unravel the mystery in no time. And so, we set off on our journey, following the trail of clues and piecing together the puzzle of the murder. It was a long and arduous journey, but in the end, we emerged victorious, with the truth finally revealed. As we stood there, looking out over the countryside, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. We had solved the case, and justice had been served. And as we made our way back to London, I knew that this was just the beginning of our next great adventure. The train rumbled along the tracks, carrying us away from the city and into the countryside. I sat in my seat, lost in thought, as Holmes sat opposite me, his eyes fixed on the landscape outside. "I've been thinking a lot about this case, Watson," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "There's something that doesn't quite add up." I looked at him, intrigued. "What is it?" I asked. Just a feeling I have," he said. "A sense that there's more to this case than meets the eye. I've been going over the facts in my mind, trying to see if I can find any connections that I've missed." I nodded, following his train of thought. "I've been thinking the same thing," I said. "There's something that doesn't feel right about this case." Holmes smiled, his eyes twinkling. I knew you were thinking the same thing, Watson," he said. "That's why I brought you along on this case. You have a keen mind, and I value your input." I felt a surge of pride at his words. I knew that I was more than just a sidekick to Holmes, I was a vital part of his team. As we continued to discuss the case, I couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and anticipation. We were on the verge of solving a complex and intriguing mystery, and I couldn't wait to see what the future held. The train rumbled on, carrying us deeper into the countryside, as we worked together to unravel the tangled threads of the murder. It was going to be a long and difficult journey, but with Holmes by my side, I knew that we would get to the truth, no matter what it took. As I stepped into the farmhouse, I was met with an eerie silence. The usual bustle of activity was absent, and the air was thick with tension. The domestic servant, usually chatty and friendly, was nowhere to be found. I called out, but there was no response. I wandered into the courtyard, my eyes scanning the empty space. That was when I saw it, the sound of wheels on gravel, growing louder with each passing moment. My father, John Cobb, our coachman, had arrived, and was hastily descending from the carriage. He was a man of few words, but his expression was one of urgency. I watched as he strode swiftly away, disappearing from view. I felt a sense of unease, but my curiosity got the better of me. I picked up my rifle and headed towards the nearby woods, intending to visit the rabbit warren on the other side of the pond. As I walked, I couldn't help but notice the strange look on Holmes' face. He was a man of few words, but his eyes seemed to hold 1,000 secrets. As I approached the pond, I heard a faint cry. "Run!" It echoed through the trees. I quickened my pace, my heart racing with anticipation. That was when I saw my father, lying motionless on the ground. He was bleeding from a severe head wound, and his eyes were glassy and lifeless. I dropped my rifle and rushed to his side, trying to stem the flow of blood. But it was too late. He had already succumbed to his injuries. I felt a wave of grief wash over me, and I knew that my life would never be the same. I made my way back to the farmhouse, my mind reeling with the events of the day. Holmes was waiting for me, his eyes fixed intently on mine. "Tell me what happened," he commanded, his voice low and gravelly. I recounted the events, every detail etched into my memory like a scar. Holmes listened intently, his eyes never leaving mine. When I finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "This case is going to be a tough one," he said, his voice laced with a hint of excitement. As the sun began to set, we set off for Ross, a charming town nestled in the picturesque valley of the Wye. The air was crisp and clean, and the rolling hills seemed to stretch on forever. We walked in silence, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath our feet. As we approached the town, I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. What lay ahead? Would we uncover the truth, or would it remain hidden forever? The game was afoot, and I was eager to see what lay in store. We arrived at the Hereford Arms, a cozy inn with a warm and welcoming atmosphere. Holmes settled in, his eyes fixed intently on the barometer. 29, he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. No wind, no clouds. Perfect for a good night's rest. I watched as he lit a cigarette, his eyes narrowing as he puffed on the smoke. He was a man of few words, but his eyes told 1,000 stories. I knew that I was in good hands, and that together, we would uncover the truth. Just then, a young woman burst into the room, her eyes flashing with emotion. Oh, Mr. Holmes!" she exclaimed, her voice trembling with urgency. "I'm so glad you're here. I know James is innocent." I watched as Holmes' eyes locked onto hers, his expression unreadable. "I think it's very probable," he said, his voice calm and measured. "But tell me, Miss Turner, what do you know about the dispute between James and his father?" The woman's eyes dropped, and for a moment, I thought I saw a glimmer of fear. "It was about me," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "James and his father were arguing about our engagement. His father wanted him to marry me, but James refused." I felt a shiver run down my spine as I listened to her words. The game was afoot, and I was eager to see where it would lead. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we set off for Hereford, the prison where James was being held. The night air was crisp and cool, and the stars twinkled like diamonds in the sky. I knew that we were in for a long night, but I was ready for whatever lay ahead. As we walked, Holmes' eyes seemed to gleam with excitement. I knew that he was relishing the challenge, and that together, we would uncover the truth. The game was afoot, and I was eager to see where it would lead. We reached the prison, and Holmes nodded curtly to the guards. "We're here to see James McCarthy," he said, his voice firm and authoritative. The guard looked up, a hint of surprise on his face. "You're the detective, aren't you?" he asked, his voice neutral. Holmes nodded, his eyes never leaving the guard's face. "I am," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "And am here to prove James' innocence." The guard nodded, his expression unreadable. "Very well," he said. "But be warned, Mr. Holmes, this case is going to be a tough one." I watched as Holmes' eyes seemed to gleam with excitement. I knew that he was relishing the challenge, and that together, we would uncover the truth. The game was afoot, and I was eager to see where it would lead. As we left the prison, I couldn't help but feel a sense of trepidation. What lay ahead? Would we uncover the truth, or would it remain hidden forever? The game was afoot, and I was eager to see what lay in store. The evening was drawing to a close, and I sat lost in thought, pondering the enigmatic case that Holmes had presented to me. He had returned to our private salon at the Hereford Arms, his eyes weary, but his mind still sharp as a razor. As he shed his cloak and settled into the armchair, I couldn't help but notice the air of fatigue mixed with intense concentration on his face. "Then?" I asked, my eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Have you spoken to young McCarthy?" "Yes, I have," Holmes replied, his voice low and measured. "But I've learned nothing new. Nothing that isn't already known. At first, I thought he was hiding something, that he knew the killer and was keeping their name secret. But now, I'm convinced that he's just as lost as the others. He's not a clever man, but he has a good heart. And, Watson, he was hopelessly in love with Mr. Nair." I raised an eyebrow, intrigued by this new development. "Ah, that explains his supposed aversion to the idea of marriage," I mused. Holmes' eyes clouded, and he smiled sadly. "Exactly, Watson. It's all quite complicated. You see, he was married to a woman named Sarah, a waitress from Bristol. They married in a registry office, and no one knew about it. But then, she left him after learning about his alleged crime. She wrote to him, telling him that she was already married to a man in Bermuda, making their marriage invalid. It was an ironic twist, Watson, a lie that set him free. I sat in stunned silence for a moment, processing the revelations. And if this young man is innocent, who is the killer? Holmes leaned forward, his eyes blazing with intensity. Ah, that's the million-dollar question, Watson. Two things have caught my attention. First, McCarthy Père had a meeting at Boscombe Pool, and it wasn't with his son, since the son had just returned from Bristol and his father was unaware of his presence. Second, the deceased man cried out "Cool!" before he even saw James. This was no ordinary cry, Watson, it was a shout from the Australian outback. It suggests that the person who was waiting for him had also lived in Australia, and that significantly narrows the list of suspects. I examined the map that Holmes had spread out on the table, studying the location of the crime with him. Ah, I see, I said, my eyes widening. And now, I understand why you said that the man who was trying to say something was trying to indicate his killer, someone from Ballarat. Holmes' eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Exactly, Watson. And now, we know that the killer is a man who lived in Ballarat, wore a grey cloak, and was familiar with the area. He also knew the path to Boscombe Pool. And the grey cloak that James thought he saw was likely the killer's, which he returned to fetch when the sun was distracted. The next morning, we set out in the Estrade's carriage, bound for Hatherley Farm and Boscombe Pool. As we rode, Holmes' eyes were fixed on the horizon, his mind working overtime to unravel the tangled threads of the case. Ah, a new development, Holmes said, his voice low and measured. Mr. Turner, the old man, is gravely ill. He's been a good friend to McCarthy and has even given him the farm at Hatherley. It's curious, Watson, Turner has been generous, but he's also opposed to the marriage. Lestrade, who was riding beside us, shot Holmes a skeptical glance. You're getting carried away with your theories, Holmes, he said. I'm just trying to follow the facts. Holmes smiled calmly. Ah, but that's where you're wrong, Lestrade. You're only seeing the surface of the case. I've been studying the footprints, and I think I've found a crucial clue. As we arrived at Boscombe Pool, I could see that the area was eerily silent. The trees seemed to be watching us, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to snatch at our clothes. Holmes, however, was undeterred, his eyes scanning the ground as he walked. Ah, here's the spot where Lestrade found the rucksack, he said, his voice low and measured. And here, I see the footprints of McCarthy's father, going back and forth. But what's this? Unusual footprints, Watson, large, flat soles, and a peculiar gait. They're the marks of a man who's used to limping, a man who's been in pain. As we examined the area, Holmes' eyes seemed to gleam with an inner light. He was like a dog on the scent, his senses heightened as he followed the trail of clues. And now, Watson, he said, his voice triumphant, I think we have our killer. He's a tall, left-handed man, who wears thick-soled boots, a grey cloak, and smokes Indian cigars with a pocket cigar case. And he has a dull, rusty razor that he uses to cut his cigar. Ah, but there's more, Watson. The grass was growing under the rocks, and it exactly matches the shape of the wounds. It's all coming together, Watson. The pieces of the puzzle are falling into place. As we drove back to London that evening, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe at the complexity of the case. Holmes had unraveled the tangled threads, revealing a web of deceit and betrayal that stretched back years. And as we watched the city lights twinkling in the distance, I knew that this was a case that would stay with me forever, a reminder of the power of human ingenuity and the unyielding pursuit of justice. The morning sun cast its golden rays upon the tranquil streets of London, as I, Dr. Watson, sat in the armchair, awaiting the arrival of my dear friend, Sherlock Holmes. The previous evening, we had received a mysterious letter from an unknown sender, requesting our presence at the hotel. The cryptic message had left us both intrigued and curious about the nature of the visit. As the clock struck 9, the door to our chamber creaked open, and a tall, imposing figure entered. His eyes, once piercing and bright, now seemed weary and haunted, as if bearing the weight of 1,000 secrets. "Ah, Mr. Holmes," he said, his voice low and gravelly, "I have something to confess." Holmes, with his characteristic calmness, gestured for the man to take a seat. "Please, Mr. Turner, tell me what is on your mind," he said, his eyes fixed intently upon the man's face. Turner began his tale, his words tumbling forth like a torrent, revealing a life of crime, desperation, and ultimately, tragedy. He spoke of his days as a young man, roaming the outback of Australia, where he had met a group of outlaws who shared his penchant for violence and lawlessness. Together, they had attacked a gold convoy, leaving 3 of their companions dead, and Turner himself had been forced to confront the consequences of his actions. But it was not until many years later, when Turner had settled in England and started a new life, that the true depth of his despair began to unfold. He had fallen deeply in love with a young woman named Alice, and their marriage had been a source of joy and hope. However, the arrival of James McCarthy, the son of a former associate, had brought with it a darkness that Turner had long sought to escape. As Turner spoke, his eyes flashing with a mix of anger and desperation, Holmes listened intently, his face a mask of calm and understanding. The game, as they say, was afoot, and Holmes was determined to unravel the tangled threads of Turner's past, to uncover the truth behind the murder of McCarthy's father, and to bring justice to those who had been wronged. The days that followed were a blur of investigation, deduction, and suspense, as Holmes and I worked tirelessly to unravel the mystery of Boscombe Pool. We scoured the countryside, interviewing witnesses, examining evidence, and piecing together the fragments of a shattered life. Finally, the day of reckoning arrived, and Turner's confession was revealed, like a beacon shining brightly in the darkness. The truth, it seemed, was far more complex and nuanced than we had initially suspected, and Holmes' remarkable powers of observation and deduction had once again proven themselves equal to the task. As the trial drew to a close, James McCarthy was acquitted, and the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. It was a moment of pure triumph, and Holmes, with his characteristic modesty, had played a key role in bringing about justice. But as we sat in our armchairs, sipping tea and reflecting on the case, I couldn't help but feel a sense of awe and gratitude for my dear friend's remarkable abilities. Holmes, it seemed, was more than just a brilliant detective. He was a guardian of the innocent, a champion of truth and justice, and a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there is always hope. And so, as I close this chapter in our remarkable journey together, I am left with a sense of wonder and gratitude for the incredible adventures we have shared. May our paths continue to cross, and may the mysteries of the universe remain forever within our grasp. And so, dear reader, I bid you adieu, for now. May the tale of John Turner and the mystery of Boscombe Pool remain etched in your memory, a reminder of the power of observation, deduction, and the human spirit. Until next time, when we shall embark on another thrilling adventure, I remain, your humble narrator, Dr. John Watson.